Marcus Calder had never been thrilled by the idea of a routine mission. As far as he was concerned, routine was just another word for watch your back for a surprise explosion. This particular mission wasn't any different. Find the missing Princess Lyra of Zelian 9, bring her back to the Queen, and go home to a nice cold beer. Simple. Even if it did involve navigating a jungle full of unpredictable wildlife and ancient ruins that no one quite understood. The planet itself was a strange mix. Technologically advanced but littered with artifacts from an ancient, nearly forgotten civilization. According to the intel from the Queen's military advisors, Princess Lyra had been on some sort of diplomatic expedition when she vanished without a trace. No distress signal, no emergency communication. Just a ghost in the wind. To Marcus, that meant one thing. Either she didn't want to be found, or someone didn't want her to be. So, what's the game plan today? Juno's voice crackled in his earpiece. The AI was a constant companion, sarcastic and unnervingly accurate in its predictions. Look for signs of her, avoid getting eaten by anything, and make it back alive. That sound good, Marcus replied, checking the status on his wristpad, which flickered with a map of the terrain ahead. He had been trekking for hours, surrounded by towering trees with leaves that shimmered like iridescent glass, their bark glowing faintly in the dim light. Right, easy as pie. Maybe you'll find a new pet while you're at it. Something big and toothy would suit your personality perfectly. Marcus snorted, pushing through a thick undergrowth. I'm starting to think you're right. This place would make a perfect zoo. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the strange hum of alien technology filled the air, like an old song that no one could quite remember the words to. The trees, each taller than any Earth flora, had a way of making everything feel smaller, more insignificant. They were designed for a world where nothing truly knew its place. Nothing, not even Marcus. His boots crunched along the ground, kicking up a soft mist that rose to his knees. Juno's voice interrupted the eerie stillness. Looks like you're closing in on something. A structure of some kind, just ahead. It's got that, we're trying to hide something ancient vibe. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his pace quickening. Let's see what it is then. Within minutes, the jungle parted to reveal a massive stone structure, half swallowed by the wilds of Zelian 9. It looked like something straight out of a myth. Carved columns, intricate designs that spiraled upwards, and an entrance dark as a tomb. As he stepped closer, the air around him seemed to pulse with a low vibration, almost as if the structure was alive in some ancient, dormant way. Creepy place, Marcus muttered to himself. Hope this isn't some sort of intergalactic shrine to bad decisions. He activated his wristpad again, scanning the area for signs of recent activity. There was something about the way the door seemed to beckon, its edges worn but not abandoned, almost as if it had been waiting. Whatever's in there, it's definitely got secrets, Juno remarked, the sarcasm making her virtual voice sound like she was rolling her eyes. I don't think we're here to dig up old ghosts, Marcus said, stepping forward, his hand resting on the cool stone. As soon as his fingers brushed it, the door shuddered and slowly opened, revealing a darkened corridor that led deep into the heart of the ruin. You know, Juno said, her voice taking on an almost gleeful tone, I bet this is where the princess is hiding, right in the middle of a booby-trapped labyrinth full of angry statues. Marcus wasn't in the mood for Juno's brand of humor, but the thought of a labyrinth full of traps did make his pulse quicken. He wasn't exactly trained for ancient puzzle solving. He was more of a find the target, bring them back, avoid being killed kind of guy. But when duty called, you didn't turn your back on it. And this mission had suddenly become a lot more interesting than he'd expected. Just keep the sarcasm to a minimum, Juno, Marcus muttered, stepping into the corridor, the walls closing in on him. His boots echoed as they reverberated through the empty halls. The place smelled of old, ancient dust, the kind of scent that couldn't be replicated in a lab. Fine, but when you find a giant stone face that talks to you, I'll be waiting to say, I told you so. The further Marcus walked into the structure, the more unnerving it became. There was no sign of life, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been here recently. And yet something was off. The place had an eerie stillness, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He rounded a corner and froze. At the end of the hallway stood a figure, tall, poised, and unmistakably regal. A woman with silver hair that shimmered like moonlight, her ears long and elegantly pointed, reminiscent of an old-world elf from the myths. She wore an ancient-looking gown, tattered but somehow still magnificent. Her eyes met his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Are you looking for someone, soldier?" Her voice was soft, like the whisper of wind through trees, but there was a hidden command in it that made Marcus instinctively stand straighter. He blinked, taken aback by her presence. "Princess Lyra?" The woman smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "So, you've heard of me. Good. That will make things simpler." Her voice was tinged with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't arrogance, but it wasn't humility either. It was something older, something wiser than any human Marcus had met before. Marcus could only nod, still caught off guard by the situation. The princess, the missing royal, stood before him, but she didn't seem anything like the image of a delicate, lost princess he had imagined. Instead, she had the air of someone who was used to being in control, used to making decisions that affected entire civilizations. "So, I take it you're not here to drag me back to my dear mother?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus shook his head, slowly regaining his composure. "I was sent to find you, yes, but I wasn't expecting this." He gestured to the vast ruins surrounding them, feeling like an idiot in comparison to her poised, ancient presence. The princess tilted her head, considering him. "I can imagine. Most aren't prepared for the reality of Zelian 9. Her eyes sparkled with something that could have been amusement. "But tell me, soldier, what is it you really want?" Marcus frowned. "I want to know why you're out here. What happened to you?" She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "What happened to me," she said softly, "is that I'm no longer part of that royal charade. I came here because I needed answers. And perhaps, so did you." Before Marcus could respond, a sudden movement in the shadows made him stiffen. He wasn't alone anymore. Marcus instinctively reached for his blaster, his muscles tensing, but Lyra's voice cut through the stillness before he could make a move. "Relax, soldier," she said, her tone light and almost teasing, as if this were just another conversation over tea. "You're not about to be eaten by an angry statue. At least not yet." Marcus didn't lower his weapon, but his eyes scanned the darkness. The sound of movement came from all around them, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were closing in. The flickering light from his wrist pad cast strange shadows, making the air feel heavier, more oppressive. Lyra stepped forward, her presence almost ethereal in the gloom. She didn't seem afraid, and that only made Marcus more uneasy. How was she so calm? Who was she really? A missing royal? Or something else entirely? "Who's there?" Marcus called out, his voice a bit sharper than he intended. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, lean, and cloaked in a ragged mix of technology and old-world fabrics. The stranger's face was obscured by a hood, but their eyes, dark and intense, glinted with a knowledge that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The stranger raised one hand in a peaceful gesture. "I mean no harm." "Oh, good, because if you had any plans to harm me, I might have just accidentally shot you," Marcus quipped, the humor forced but necessary. His grip on the blaster tightened anyway. Lyra gave him a quick glance, amusement flickering across her features. "You should be careful with that. The last person who shot someone in these ruins, well, let's just say they didn't make it to their second lunch." Marcus's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure that's the most reassuring thing you could have said." The stranger chuckled, and in a surprising move, pulled back their hood. The face beneath was scarred, with skin that looked almost too smooth, like it had been altered, modified by some advanced technology. The stranger's lips twisted into a grin, though it seemed a little more cynical than kind. "You're a little jumpy for a soldier, aren't you?" the stranger said, his voice deep but with an edge of amusement. "I'm starting to think I've signed up for the wrong kind of vacation," Marcus muttered, lowering his blaster but not letting go of it. Lyra crossed her arms, watching the interaction with a strange mix of amusement and contemplation. That's Hyrex. I'm guessing your soldiers weren't briefed on the local population? Marcus gave her a confused look. I thought the only inhabitants here were the locals who built the ruins. Lyra shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. The Zellian 9 natives? Oh, they were a long time ago. Hyrex here is a member of the last known descendants of the Solarian people. Well, it's complicated. Hyrex chuckled again, as if hearing this all for the first time. Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it, Princess. Marcus still didn't understand, but he wasn't about to ask for a history lesson right now. So, what is this? Some sort of mysterious stranger who's not quite what he seems situation? Lyra's lips twitched into a smile. You could say that. Hyrex has been helping me with my little quest. Helping? Marcus shot her a skeptical glance. You're not exactly the type to ask for help, Princess. She raised an eyebrow. I'm not? I seem to remember someone handing me a blaster earlier, thinking I might need it. Point taken, Marcus said, lowering his hands from the weapon. He still didn't trust the situation, but there was no point in antagonizing the stranger, at least not yet. Hyrex's eyes flicked between them both, studying Marcus. You're the soldier from the Queen's military, aren't you? The one looking for the princess? Funny how things turn out. You were probably expecting a helpless royal, right? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He didn't exactly see himself as the type to expect anything from anyone, least of all royalty. But the question lingered in his mind. Had he expected some delicate princess locked away in a tower? Or had he expected her to be exactly like this? Cool, calm, and in command of a situation that didn't make sense. I wasn't expecting anything, Marcus finally said, trying to keep his tone neutral. But I'm getting used to surprises, and you're a big one. Hyrex nodded, then turned his attention to the walls around them. Well, you're not the only one who's been surprised. These ruins, they weren't meant to be found. Marcus's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes darkening as she stared at the ancient symbols on the walls. These ruins hold a secret, a power long forgotten by the galaxy. And it's not just some artifact waiting for a nice tourist to pick it up. It's dangerous. If it falls into the wrong hands... Like your mother's, Marcus muttered, remembering the Queen's cold demeanor. He wasn't sure he trusted the woman back home, but there was something about Lyra that made him believe she was telling the truth. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. If you think my mother would have any interest in saving the galaxy, you're mistaken. There was a pause. Even Hyrex, who had been calm and collected up until now, seemed to stiffen at the remark. Marcus wasn't sure what to make of it. So what exactly is it you're after? Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, something vulnerable flickered behind her gaze. I'm looking for a way to reconnect with my people, the Solarians, my ancestors. I've been alone for too long, Marcus. There's something here, something I need to find. Which is where we come in, right? Hyrex asked, his voice laced with a hint of skepticism. You've got the soldier, I've got the tech, and together we'll unravel an ancient secret. Marcus couldn't help but smile. The way Hyrex put it made it sound like a bad action movie. Let me guess, we'll have to dodge ancient traps, fight off rival factions, and somehow make it out of here alive? Lyra chuckled, her eyes narrowing. Pretty much. Great. Just what I needed, Marcus said, shaking his head. Let's get this over with. Hyrex clapped him on the shoulder, his smile stretching wide. Don't worry, soldier. You're in good hands. At least, we're not boring. I'm beginning to question that, Marcus muttered under his breath as he followed them deeper into the ruins, his mind racing with more questions than answers. Marcus had never been a fan of ancient prophecies. They always seemed to have too many vague statements about fate and destiny, none of which ever seemed to match his understanding of the world. But here he was, standing in the heart of a long-forgotten chamber deep beneath Zellian 9, with the Princess Lyra, Hyrex, in a holographic projection of what was very clearly an ancient Solarian queen. It wasn't exactly the adventure he'd imagined when he signed up for the military. The walls around them hummed with a low, ancient energy. Symbols glowed faintly on the stones, shifting in patterns that didn't quite make sense to him. The air felt charged, electric in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Lyra was standing in front of the central console, her fingers hovering over the strange, glowing controls. She seemed calm, almost too calm considering the situation. They had only moments before the entire complex would self-destruct, and every second that ticked by made Marcus feel like they were one wrong move away from becoming cosmic dust. "You sure this is going to work?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking the silence as he glanced nervously at the timer ticking down on his wristpad. Lyra glanced over her shoulder at him, her silver eyes gleaming. "You doubt me, soldier?" Marcus couldn't help but grin. "No more than I doubt the wisdom of following you into the unknown." Hyrex chuckled from the corner, adjusting a strange piece of technology, a portable interface module, that he'd been using to decipher the ruined security systems. "Seems like a perfect plan, doesn't it? Princess, soldier, and a disgruntled, underpaid tech guy. What could go wrong?" Lyra shot him a dry look, but didn't comment. Marcus, on the other hand, leaned against the wall, trying to look casual. Inside, he felt the weight of the situation pressing in. This was the moment when everything would change, when they either cracked the mystery of the ruins or got blown to pieces. Either way, they'd find out who or what had been hiding here all these years. The hologram flickered again, this time showing the face of a woman who looked almost identical to Lyra, only her features were older, more regal. She was surrounded by symbols Marcus couldn't begin to comprehend, her hands stretched out as if beckoning them forward. "You're the last one," the hologram intoned, its voice deep and resonant, echoing off the stone walls. "The bearer of the final key." Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hands resting on the console now. "It's me," she whispered. "I was born to complete this. My ancestors left me this responsibility." "You think you can unlock whatever secret this thing is hiding?" Marcus asked, a note of skepticism creeping into his voice. "What if you're just activating some kind of doomsday device?" Lyra's eyes softened, but her focus never wavered. "It's not about unlocking power, Marcus. It's about understanding what was lost, what my people were trying to protect. The Solarians were not just guardians of technology. They were stewards of knowledge. The power here isn't a weapon. It's the future. And what if the future is a total disaster?" Marcus replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "You've been a soldier too long," Lyra said with a smile, a brief flicker of humor in her eyes. "Always thinking of the worst case. Sometimes the future is the only way forward." As if on cue, the central console flashed, a surge of energy running through it. The room lit up with a brilliant white light, and Marcus instinctively shielded his eyes. When he lowered his arm, the hologram had shifted. The projection of the ancient queen now seemed to gaze directly at him, her expression filled with an unspoken understanding. "Your journey was never just about finding me," the hologram said. "It was always about finding yourself." Marcus stared at the projection, feeling a strange knot twist in his stomach. "I don't understand." Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You weren't just sent here to find me. You were sent to change the course of everything. This mission, this galaxy, it's all connected." The walls around them began to hum again, and Marcus could feel a strange pull in the air, as if the entire ruin was alive, breathing with them. The last few moments felt surreal. The entire galaxy seemed to be holding its breath. Hyrex swore under his breath. "Well, I don't know about you two, but I'm about to get very annoyed if we don't figure this out soon. Time is running out." The timer on Marcus's wristpad was down to a few seconds. He could feel the tension building in the room, the moment of truth approaching. It was almost like the universe had suddenly become aware of their actions, like they were standing at the edge of something too powerful to comprehend. Lyra's fingers pressed the final sequence of codes into the console. The hologram of the queen smiled, her eyes now soft and filled with a quiet sense of peace. "You did it," she said simply. "The path forward is yours." The energy in the room shifted, and Marcus could feel it. Whatever had been unlocked was not some kind of ancient weapon, but a map, a network of knowledge and understanding far beyond the current galactic civilizations. It wasn't a weapon. It was an opportunity. The Solarians had protected this knowledge for a reason. It was something that could change the way they understood the universe, something that could connect civilizations in ways they had never imagined. As the light from the console began to fade, Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the weight of everything that had just happened. "We've done it," she said softly, "but now the real work begins." Marcus, for the first time since he'd landed on this strange world, found himself believing in the impossible. The ruins, the prophecy, the journey. He had been part of something that was more than just a mission. He had uncovered something that could change the course of history. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a small cog in a machine. He felt like he was part of something much bigger. Hyrex patted him on the back, breaking his reverie. "So now what? We just go back and tell everyone we saved the galaxy?" Lyra chuckled, the sound light and genuine. "Not quite. We have to make sure the knowledge we uncovered doesn't fall into the wrong hands." "Right. Because saving the galaxy sounds better with a little more risk," Marcus replied, his voice dry. "But now," Lyra said, her tone more serious, "we can finally take control of our destiny." Marcus looked at her, and for a moment he saw the weight of everything she had been carrying. The royal bloodline, the responsibility, the pain of being disconnected from her people. He realized that their journey wasn't just about finding the princess, it was about finding themselves, both of them. With a wry smile, Marcus nodded. "Well, if this whole saving the galaxy thing gets old, I hear there's always room for more soldiers in the Queen's army." Lyra smiled back, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I think we're past that, Marcus. We have our own path now." As they left the ruins behind, the weight of their discovery settled in, a future that was no longer uncertain, but full of possibilities. For the first time, Marcus didn't feel like a soldier just following orders. He felt like someone who had been part of something monumental, something that had changed everything, and whatever came next, he would face it head on. A man with 3 first names had once sold him the ship, swearing on his 4th that it was a galactic gem in disguise. Bryn Calder would later swear in return, on every bolt and wire, that the only thing disguised about the Rust Bucket Serenade was its ability to remain airborne. At any moment it could give up the ghost, sputtering out in a magnificent display of poor life choices and unregulated engine grease. He was drifting along the edge of an unregistered star graveyard when he picked up the anomaly. The nav scanner pinged with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners or black hole alerts. Bryn sat up from his nap inside the captain's chair, which doubled as a massage recliner when you hit the console just right. He tapped the screen. The signal pulsed back. A derelict ship, big, rich-looking, spinning lazily in the vacuum, like it had all the time in the world. "No distress signal," he muttered. "No life signs. Definitely haunted." He cracked his knuckles, tossed the remainder of a half-eaten protein bar into the airlock. Out of principle, not sanitation, and hit the thrusters. The rust bucket protested with a whine that sounded vaguely like a goat being emotionally manipulated. But it moved. The ship in question was old, possibly royal, and had too many fins. Bryn had learned long ago that the fancier the fins, the more useless the vessel. Probably Thalathari design, one of those regal species with too much gold and not enough common sense. Still, salvage was salvage, and he wasn't above dressing in a clean shirt to impress dead monarchs. He breached the airlock manually, because automation was for rich people and living ships, and entered with his helmet sealed, flashlight attached to his shoulder, and a crowbar that had sentimental value. The corridor was dark, untouched, cold. Not spooky exactly, just the sort of quiet that made your own heartbeat feel like a drum solo. Rooms passed. Furniture hovered midair. Decorative walls flickered with energy sigils, long dead but still whispering about better days. He followed the trail toward what looked like a containment vault. That's when he saw it. A pod. Not big, not imperial, just sleek, tucked behind a fractured wall. Its glass surface was fogged, but the stasis field around it shimmered faintly. That meant power. That meant a find. That meant maybe he could finally pay off that debt to Krollo the Limp, who had stopped accepting excuses and started accepting fingers. He wiped the glass with his sleeve and froze. Inside was a woman. She looked human. or close enough that his brain filled in the gaps. Pale skin, black hair, and ears that curved long and elegant above her head like biological tiaras. Not a scratch on her. Stasis preserved. Sleeping. "Oh no," Bryn whispered. "I found a space princess. This is how it starts. Next thing you know, I'm sword fighting a cyborg over an asteroid." He should have walked away, logged the coordinates, sold the info. But something in her face stopped him. Not fear, not fragility. Strength. Even sleeping, she looked like she might wake up and slap destiny in the mouth. With the delicacy of a man disarming a live snack machine, he activated the pod's release. The hiss of the seal broke the silence like a gunshot. Lights inside flickered. The shimmer faded. She didn't move. Then, with the sharpness of a predator and the grace of royalty, her eyes opened. She sat up in one clean motion, grabbing his crowbar with reflexes that suggested far too much training, and slammed it into the wall beside his head. "Whoa!" Bryn shouted, hands up. "Welcome back to consciousness. You're very, coordinated." She blinked, looked at the crowbar, looked at him, and frowned like she'd just discovered a soggy sandwich in her glove compartment. Her voice came next, low, melodic, and absolutely incomprehensible. She pointed the crowbar at his chest. "Okay, I'm gonna guess you're asking who I am. I'm Bryn. I'm not trying to harvest your organs. I found your pod. You were frozen. I thought, hey, free artifact. And now here we are, you threatening me with my own crowbar." "Wild day." She stared, then said something short, sharp, and presumably insulting. Bryn slowly reached into his belt pouch and pulled out his universal translator. He turned it on, holding it out like an offering to a judgmental god. "Give me a sec. This thing's got a lag worse than galactic customs." The device clicked, whirred, and spat static. Then her voice came through, rough and clipped. "Where am I?" "Well," Bryn said, leaning back against the nearest wall, "technically on a salvage mission in the corpse of what looks like your old ride. But don't worry, I've got a ship. It has character and a toaster. You'll love it." She narrowed her eyes. "You removed me from the stasis vessel." "Gently," he added, "with care, and possibly some accidental elbowing. Look, you were in a pod in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know if it was malfunctioning, and you looked a bit too not dead for a salvage piece." She rubbed her forehead. "How long?" Bryn frowned. "That is a great question. Your stasis log was corrupted. I couldn't get a date, but by the look of the ship's hull decay, maybe 15 standard years. Could be 20 if your engineers like to cut corners." She swayed slightly, then composed herself, rising to full height. He expected her to collapse. Instead, she stood as though her spine had been carved from command alloy. She was thinner than she probably once had been, but her presence took up all the air in the room. The translator caught her next words. "Show me this ship. The one that smells of burnt circuits and expired preservatives." Bryn winced. "It also smells like friendship and rust, but mostly friendship." She followed him out with hesitation but not fear. Her eyes moved like she was cataloging every detail, every escape route, every weakness in his posture. When they reached the airlock, she paused. He saw her glance back once at the ruined ship. There was something there, a flicker in her expression. Pain, memory, duty, maybe. Then it vanished. Back aboard the Rust Bucket Serenade, she wrinkled her nose the second the recycled air hit her nostrils. "Cozy," Bryn said. "Used to be worse, actually. A raccoon hybrid lived here before me." She sat slowly, her gaze locking on the viewport where stars smeared across the void like spilled light. She looked smaller in his cabin, though not diminished, like a storm contained. He brought her a warm packet of food. She poked it with a spoon like it might detonate. He grinned. "First course, rehydrated noodles with a side of existential dread." She raised a perfect imperious eyebrow. Bryn leaned against the bulkhead and took a bite. "So, you got a name, or do I just call you your grumpy highness until you hit me again?" She exhaled, long and slow. "Sayara," she said. "You may call me Sayara." "Well, Sayara," he said, raising his fork in salute. "Welcome to the Rust Bucket. Try not to murder me before breakfast. She did not smile, but she didn't deny the possibility either. The third time Sayara rerouted his entire nav console without asking, Bryn considered launching himself out the nearest airlock just to get a moment of peace. It wasn't that she was wrong. She rarely was. It was that she did it like the ship already belonged to her. Like she'd simply misplaced it under a pile of space debris, and now everything must return to its proper queenly order. He found her hunched over the main terminal, speaking quietly in that old slippery language of hers to the ship's AI, which had somehow grown fond of her. Traitorous thing. It never responded to Bryn with such chirpy compliance, even when he sweet-talked it or bribed it with software updates. "Hey," he said, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes. "Do I still live here? Or am I now the humble court jester of the Rust Bucket Royal Court?" Sayara turned without looking guilty, because guilt, it seemed, was beneath her. "Your navigation system was inefficient. I recalibrated the long-range sensors to detect residual quantum signatures. You are now less likely to drift into a singularity." "Thanks," Bryn said dryly, "but singularities are where I keep my emergency fund. You ruined the mystery." She walked past him like a starship in motion, purposeful, indifferent to protests, and far too elegant for a place with duct tape holding 3 panels together. He watched her cross to the galley, open the warming drawer, and grimace at the contents with a level of disdain usually reserved for war criminals. "That's protein loaf," he offered. "Vintage. I think it's fermented." "It's vibrating," she said. "That's how you know it's working." Their uneasy truce continued for several days, during which Bryn learned several valuable lessons. Sayara did not snore, but she talked in her sleep, usually issuing commands that could qualify as war crimes. She could also disassemble and reassemble a pulse rifle in 30 seconds, clean her own wounds without flinching, and identify stellar drift patterns faster than his AI. She also once stabbed a malfunctioning food dispenser, which finally started working again, probably out of fear. Still, she was trying, in her own regal, slightly terrifying way. They sat one evening, or whatever passed for evening, aboard a drifting relic in the viewing bay. Sayara sipped tea made from something Bryn had found in an unlabeled tin that smelled suspiciously like bark. It hadn't killed them yet. "Have you considered," she asked suddenly, "installing a gravity compensator that doesn't sound like it's dying?" "I have," he said, "but then I'd have to give up the part where it sounds like a whale sighing. That's the ship's soul, Sayara." She looked at him. "This vessel has no soul." He grinned. "Says the woman who lectures the toaster when it burns her bread." There was a pause, then, just for a breath, she smirked. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Bryn saw it, like a moon peeking from behind the clouds of command. Their routine was disrupted, as most pleasant things are, by the sudden blaring of the proximity alarm. Bryn leapt from his chair. Sayara was already at the controls. "I didn't touch anything," he shouted, diving into the co-pilot seat. "I didn't even breathe weird." "Unidentified vessel approaching from sublight speeds," the AI announced. "Minimal emissions. No communications. No broadcast signature." Sayara stiffened. Bryn saw her eyes narrow to slits, calculating and cold. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "No," she said flatly. "Prepare to run." "You mean flee, or tactically retreat? Let's call it an assertive relocation." She ignored him and typed in a burst of commands so fast the screen flickered in protest. The Rust Bucket Serenade lurched into motion, flinging itself toward a nearby asteroid belt like a cat flung into bathwater. Behind them, the approaching ship increased speed. "Okay," Bryn said, gripping the controls. "Do we want to know who it is, or are we going full mysterious pass mode where you drop hints but no real answers until things explode?" "They are Thalathari loyalists," she said. "Or they were. Now they serve someone else." "Great," he muttered. "You know, when I imagined meeting an alien princess." "Queen," she corrected. "Right, Queen. I didn't expect to be chased by space fascists." "They will not negotiate. If they board us, you will die." Bryn swallowed. "That's refreshingly straightforward, but also rude." He twisted the manual throttle, something he was never supposed to do because it made the entire engine room vibrate like a drunk hive of bees. The ship surged forward. The asteroid field loomed. Ciara took the targeting array and began launching signal flares into the debris. What are you? They track thermals, she said. If we scatter enough false signatures, a burst of plasma fire zipped past them, clipping the starboard wing. Sparks shot through the interior. Bryn yelped. That was my favorite wing. Then fly better. Fly better? Do you see these controls? They're labeled in 3 languages and one of them is just angry emoticons. They dove into the asteroid field, bouncing through rocks the size of small moons. Bryn had never been religious, but he began mentally composing a prayer to whatever deity governed reckless maneuvers and unlikely survivals. The enemy ship hesitated, turned back. Bryn collapsed into the pilot's seat, exhaling like someone had just extracted his skeleton. Ciara stared into the void, her jaw clenched. You okay? He asked. They will report to the others. I am no longer hidden. He reached for the emergency tea pouch, torn from its hook during the chaos. Well, he said, on the bright side, now I know what to write on your welcome banner. Queen of the Galaxy, likes long walks through asteroid belts, dislikes loyalist assassins. Ciara didn't answer. She sat in silence. Later, when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I was meant to die on that ship, she said. That was the plan. Bryn blinked. That's a terrible plan. It was not mine, she said. It was theirs. A peaceful transfer of power. I would disappear. No bloodshed. No war. And you were okay with that? I had no choice. He sipped his tea. It was awful. It felt like drinking warm moss. Well, he said, now you do. She didn't respond. But when he set a new course, toward a small trading post on the edge of forgotten space, she didn't object. She even adjusted the heading by half a degree, and Bryn took that as progress. The trading post on Orm 5 looked like someone had tried to build a city out of spare parts from 5 different centuries and then lost interest halfway through. It clung to the asteroid like a stubborn barnacle, flickering with neon signs and the occasional electrical fire. Bryn had seen worse, but not often. Ciara didn't flinch when they docked. She simply adjusted her hood, tucked her long ears beneath a band of fabric, and stepped into the crowd like she hadn't once ruled 20 star systems. Bryn followed, trying not to look like a guy walking beside the most hunted person in the quadrant. He succeeded for maybe 3 seconds. They were here for information. Someone Ciara insisted was still loyal to the old ways. Someone who had the codes to scramble a fleet's recognition protocols. Bryn didn't ask questions. He figured when a queen asked you to escort her into a shady part of the galaxy, you just made sure your blaster was charged and your boots were fast. The contact turned out to be a one-eyed insectoid named Vort, who sold counterfeit wedding licenses and lightly illegal cloning recipes on the side. Vort was delighted to see Ciara, mostly because she hadn't incinerated him the last time they met. I thought you were dead, Vort rasped, antennae twitching. Ciara raised an eyebrow. You attempted to sell me as a concubine to the Avalor Syndicate. Vort buzzed nervously. Water under the reactor, yes? She held out her hand. Give me the codes. Vort complied. Bryn suspected this was not out of respect, but because Vort had survival instincts and a vivid imagination for what Ciara could still do with a shard of glass and a length of string, they left without incident, though Bryn bought a bootleg hologame titled Space Ferrets 4, The Reckoning on their way out. It seemed like a decent use of credits, and also he needed something to distract from the creeping dread that had returned to Ciara's posture. Back on the ship, Ciara explained, if I use these codes, I can access the Central Fleet's broadcast system, override the Loyalists' false signals, reveal the truth to every ship in the Alliance. They will see that I live. Sounds good, Bryn said, flipping the game cartridge in his hand. What's the catch? They will come, she said. All of them. He blinked. All? Yes. I think I just swallowed my tongue. Ciara paced. They will not come for negotiation. They will come to restore order, which means removing me from power permanently. So you're gonna surrender? She stopped. Her eyes found his. Number, I'm going to make them choose. They broadcast the signal from the edge of the Hyrule Drift, where old war satellites still blinked like forgotten gods. Ciara appeared in full regalia, seated upon a makeshift throne Bryn had cobbled together from a broken captain's chair and some glitter tape. She spoke clearly, without artifice. I am Sierra of the Thalathari. I live, I was betrayed, and I have seen the galaxy you were promised under new rule. She detailed the cruelty, the purges, the quiet terror behind the silence of compliant systems. I do not return to reclaim a throne, she said. I return to offer a choice. Continue down this path or remember who we were. Then she cut the transmission. They waited. For 17 minutes and 42 seconds, Bryn tried to make tea with a cracked infuser and failed. Then the scanners lit up. Ships incoming, the AI reported. 17 at light jump proximity, more beyond. Bryn looked at Sayara. She looked tired, but not afraid. The first ship hailed them. Its emblem was still the old crest, before the coup. This is Commander Enra of the Vigilant Star. We received your message. We stand with the true queen. One by one, more followed. Not all. Some refused to answer. A few turned and fled. But enough remained. Enough to matter. Sayara didn't cry. Bryn might have, a little, but blamed it on the tea fumes. The transition was not smooth. There were skirmishes, debates, a full day where one battalion insisted Sayara had been replaced by a clone, and Bryn had to disprove the theory by throwing a wrench at her. She caught it without flinching. They dropped the claim. Through it all, Sayara didn't reclaim the throne. Instead, she called for a council, equal voices, decentralized power, a radical thing for a woman raised among imperial relics and genetic prophecy. They offered her the crown anyway. She said no. They offered again. She looked at Bryn. He shrugged. It does come with fancy robes. She took it, but only symbolically. The real rule belonged to the people now. She just wore the crown so no one else would think to steal it. After the last ceremony, after the last oath, she found Bryn on the ship packing his tools. You're leaving, she said. I was never built for court life, he said. I don't bow well. Knees make weird noises. You could stay. He looked at her. You're not the woman I found in that pod anymore, he said. And I'm not the idiot who thought he could fix everything with duct tape. You belong out there. And you, he smiled. I belong where things are broken, preferably not trying to kill me. She nodded. You are difficult. You're terrifying. They stood there a moment longer, then she kissed him. Not a farewell, not a promise, just a moment. He left the next day, aboard the Rust Bucket Serenade, slightly cleaner now, still prone to alarming noises. He didn't look back until he hit the edge of the drift. When he did, the stars behind him gleamed brighter. Maybe it was just the new fuel line, but he liked to think it was her. The royal contract said routine diagnostics. That was the first lie. Darren Holt squinted at the readout flickering in the corner of his visor, half expecting it to tell him he'd voided the warranty on a 7,000-year-old artifact. Again. The guts of the Varelian throne module were not, in any known language, standard. They were mostly humming and glowing, and probably illegal in half the galaxy, assuming the Galactic Registry ever found the courage to knock on the palace door. He ducked under a spine of bronze filaments, nearly slipping on a patch of dried coolant. His boots left faint blue smears on the ancient metal floor. The low ceiling and tangle of conduits forced him to crawl like a maintenance gremlin. Not that anyone aboard the Varelian Dawn would say that out loud, except maybe Skiff, the over-eager linguist who seemed to think sarcasm was an earthling martial art. His toolkit beeped. The main conduit was sealed with an archaic biometric lock, long corroded. No power signatures matched modern tech. He grunted and pulled out a resonance spike, jabbing it into the joint like a crowbar in a sacrificial ceremony. The console made a low, uneasy chime. Then something behind it shifted, like a breath held too long. A seam cracked open in the floor. Darren flinched back. Nope. No thank you. I'm not paid enough for this, he muttered, even though he absolutely was. By imperial decree, which meant it came with honor, prestige, and the looming threat of execution for poor customer service. The floor panels folded away with agonizing slowness. Beneath, in a chamber untouched by time or cleaning protocols, floated a sword. Correction? The sword. He didn't know how he knew that, but the moment he saw it, something deep in his chest clenched. The blade hovered, weightless and shimmering, forged from some translucent alloy that refracted light in ways his brain didn't enjoy. Sigils moved along its surface like oil across water, unreadable but oddly familiar. It didn't hum. It sang. He blinked. That's definitely not a coolant pump. He turned to grab his comm unit. Behind him, a voice crisp enough to sharpen glass said, "Step away from the relic." Queen Aranel, in full ceremonial regalia and flanked by two honor guards who looked like they'd punch gravity if ordered to, stood in the access shaft's archway. Her ears, long and tapering like polished obsidian leaves, flicked faintly as she surveyed the scene. "I was just," Darren gestured vaguely at the exposed chamber, "performing preventative maintenance." She narrowed her eyes. "You opened a sanctified relic vault with a metal stick." "Technically," he said, holding up the resonance spike, "it's a multi-phase harmonic tuner, calibrated for anti-entropy resonance. Also makes toast if you're desperate." She did not laugh. Varelians rarely did. The sword drifted higher, angling toward him. Darren took a cautious step back. "Okay, let's not do the floaty weapon thing. I've had enough of that in VR training." The sword pulsed. Every light in the chamber flickered. The temperature dropped. Aranel barked an order in a language he didn't understand, and the guards leveled weapons at the blade. That went about as well as aiming water pistols at a neutron star. Darren held up both hands. "I'm just a mechanic. I fix coffee machines. My greatest accomplishment last week was unclogging a fluid recirculator with a sock." The sword drifted toward him. "Oh no!" It touched his outstretched hand, and the universe tilted. He didn't hear music. He remembered music. Choirs of stars screaming and singing and whispering all at once. He saw a battlefield under alien skies, blackened by weapons not yet invented. A figure, tall, armored in light, raising this same blade. Then silence. He stumbled back, the sword now inert in his grasp. The chamber was still. Aranel's expression had not changed, but something in her eyes had. Calculation, recognition, maybe even fear. "The blade of Thorell," she said softly, "responds only to the Guardian." Darren looked down at the sword. "Do Guardians usually smell like engine grease?" Skiff skidded into the chamber moments later, panting, carrying a scanner 3 times his size. "I got the readouts. Oh, stars, is that the sword? You touched it?" "Didn't exactly have a choice. It came to me like a creepy pet." Aranel stepped forward. "This was prophesied, a being from the dust worlds bearing no crest, no name of honor, chosen by the blade to defend the throne in the time of eclipse." "That sounds very ominous." "You are the hand of Thorell." Darren sighed, adjusting his grip on the now inert sword. "Can I decline the promotion?" Skiff cleared his throat. "Technically, prophecy bindings are non-negotiable under Varelian religious law. You're basically divine now. Congratulations. Or condolences." Aranel stepped forward, face unreadable. "We must speak in private. The council must be informed. The lineage awakened, the heirs tested." "Right. That sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. Do I get dental?" She turned and left without answering. Skiff whispered, "You should probably stop asking about dental. They think it's a weird Earth ritual." Darren stared at the sword, then at the open floor panel, then at the small scorch mark now decorating his sleeve. "This is what I get for trying to save up for a new plasma wrench." He followed, muttering to himself, "Next time someone says simple repair job, I'm charging extra." Darren discovered 3 things in quick succession after being declared the Hand of Thorell. First, Varelian armor itched. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. It itched with all the enthusiasm of a radioactive sweater soaked in nanofibers. Whatever ceremonial alloy it was made from didn't like humans. Or maybe it just didn't like Darren. The cuirass buzzed when he walked. The shoulder plates pinged when he breathed. At some point, the left vambrace began giving off faint static shocks like it was developing opinions about his posture. Second, there were way too many stairs in the Royal Archives. Third, the sword had a name. He just couldn't pronounce it. "It's called Shireth Nultar," Skiff explained, perched upside down on a library bench for no reason that conformed to basic physiology. "Roughly translates to the unshackled voice of the last flame before dusk. But that's kind of clunky, so you can just call it Jhai." Darren stared at him. What happened to just calling things Dave? Skiff blinked all three of his eyes. Is this another human joke? Is Dave a god of small engines? Honestly, maybe. They'd been locked away in the upper stacks of the Royal Archive complex for hours now, surrounded by holoscribes and scent-reactive scrolls that puff cinnamon when open. The Queen's advisors had declared Darren unfit for open court appearances until his knowledge of prophecy, etiquette, and historical precedent reached something approximating non-disgraceful. Darren had taken that to mean, "You embarrassed us so thoroughly, we need you to stop talking for a bit." Aranel had only said, "You must understand the role before you can claim it." Then she vanished through a door sealed by thought recognition. He spent the first hour trying to find snacks. Now he was trying to figure out why the sword, Jai apparently, had chosen him, or if it had made a mistake, or possibly if he was already dead, and this was some elaborate afterlife-themed prank orchestrated by co-workers back on Station D47. He glanced at the blade, resting on a low obsidian dais nearby. It remained stubbornly sword-like, not humming, not glowing, just sitting there like it didn't remember nearly launching him into a prophetic vision the day before. "I don't get it," he muttered. "I'm not special. I flunked out of orbital engineering school because I confused mass drivers with vending machines. Once I installed a trash compactor backward and trapped a senator's cat for 3 hours. I should not be allowed near relics, much less wield them." Skiff flipped himself upright and tapped a scroll with one claw. "Here, see this? Historical record of the previous wielder, Thalas N. Moran, a half-blood scout from the Rim colonies. Total nobody, until the blade chose him during the siege of Vayar. And then what? He led an army into a black hole and emerged with half of it intact." Darren whistled. "So, no pressure." He reached for a mug of kava, took a sip, and spat it back out. "That's not sugar. That's something illegal in 17 systems." Skiff squinted at the cup. "Oh, that's dreamroot paste. Varelians use it to speak to the memory echoes of their ancestors. Probably shouldn't drink it if you're not looking to see your own funeral." Darren shoved the mug away. "Noted. Also, you guys need to label your beverages better." The door hissed open behind them. Queen Aranel stepped in, her armor exchanged for something more practical. If practical, included enough embroidery to outfit a small opera company. Her expression was unreadable, as usual, but her ears twitched just slightly when she looked at Darren. That was new. "You've read the Scroll of Veilfire?" "I tried. It caught fire. I put it out." "I think that counts." Her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "We are being watched. Already, factions within the High Council question your legitimacy. The cult of the Ecliptarch has agents in every system. They will move faster now." "Neat. And when do I get my cape?" "There is no cape." "Tragic." She strode past him, pausing at the sword. Her fingers hovered near its hilt but did not touch. "This blade is older than the Empire. Forged in the dark between stars. It remembers everything." Darren leaned on the table. "So, like a sword with emotional baggage." She turned. "There is a training room prepared for you. You will learn to wield it properly." He looked at the sword. "Will it yell at me if I hold it wrong?" "Number. But it might sing." "I don't know if that's better." The training room was less room and more orbital gymnasium with aggressive opinions. Gravity shifts, kinetic walls, combat drones with too many legs. Darren nearly died twice in the first hour, once to a sparring bot, once to a very enthusiastic hover drone that mistook his helmet for a target beacon. Arnell watched from the observation deck with the same expression one might wear while judging cheese. The sword didn't help. When he swung it, it either overcompensated or refused to move. When he asked it nicely, it vibrated just enough to make his teeth chatter. When he swore at it, it hummed like it was enjoying itself. "Do I have to woo it?" he yelled up toward Aranel. "Should I light some candles?" She didn't respond, but he was pretty sure one of the guards laughed, quietly. He collapsed onto the padded floor, sweating through his armor, the sword lying beside him like a smug cat. "I give up. This thing hates me." "It does not hate you," Aranel said, descending via lift. "It resists you. Same thing where I'm from." She knelt beside him, took the sword and turned it in her hands. "It fears misuse. The last to wield it ended worlds. Darren frowned. And you gave it to me. Do I look like someone with planet-ending ambitions? Number, you look like someone who can't sit still without breaking something. That may be what we need. He sat up. That sounds suspiciously like a compliment. She rose. Take a moment, then return. We're departing for Revik 9. Sounds warm and inviting. It's a dead world, storm-locked and riddled with gravity scars. The cult is there. They're building a gate. Darren sighed and looked at the sword. Guess it's time to save the galaxy. Skiff appeared at the door, waving a datapad. Also, I may have accidentally rewritten the ship's navigation protocol to prioritize disco playlists. Aronel blinked. Darren grinned. See? Emotional support DJ. And for a moment, just a flicker, Aronel smiled. The Varelian dawn hummed as it dropped out of hyperspace over Revik 9, the dead world barely visible through the swirling storm clouds. It was as if the planet itself was trying to reject them, its surface a patchwork of jagged terrain and swirling gravitational anomalies. Darren had been briefed on the gate, a device capable of opening pathways into other dimensions. But even with the tech specs in hand, he wasn't convinced it was a good idea to stick around and find out. He was pretty sure the ship's navigation system had developed a taste for Earth disco by now, given that Skiff kept setting the ship's intercoms to play it on repeat. It was a bit too upbeat for the "we might die horribly" vibe, but it was a decent distraction. You know, Darren said, adjusting his helmet, the whole dark gate to another dimension thing sounds like the setup to a really bad adventure movie. I'm thinking some bad CGI, maybe a couple of punchy one-liners. Skiff, ever the optimist, beamed at him with all three of his eyes. That's the spirit. There's nothing like collapsing an interdimensional doorway to give you that old-fashioned, feel-good hero's journey. He tapped his datapad. Oh, and I accidentally mapped the local gravity wells to shuffle 70s funk. You're welcome. I'm never leaving Earth again, Darren muttered. Aronel entered the command deck, her gaze cool and unreadable, as usual. We are close. Be prepared. The Ecliptarch's cult will not allow us to destroy the gate without consequence. We've got a plan, right? Darren asked, clapping his hands together. Because last time, we were winging it, and I'm pretty sure Skiff rewrote half the crew's family history. The plan is simple, Aronel said. We shut down the gate, destroy it before the Ecliptarch can open a full portal. Simple, Darren repeated. Sure, simple. But can we do it while avoiding getting our faces melted off by whatever eldritch horror is waiting for us? Skiff's eyes glowed brighter. Oh, I've got the perfect playlist for that. Please don't. Darren gave him a stern look, but Skiff just grinned. Aronel's expression softened. It was the first time Darren had seen her anything other than stoic. I believe in you, Darren. He didn't know if it was the sincerity in her voice or the fact that she actually used his first name for once, but something in him clicked. He hadn't wanted any of this, but somehow, now it felt like it was meant to be. Maybe it was just the sword, or maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that he'd learned to stop running from the chaos and started leaning into it. The shuttle docked on the surface with a thud, and the team disembarked, weapons at the ready. The sky above Revik 9 was a sickly red, gravity anomalies distorting the air like waves of heat. The gate was ahead, a massive shimmering structure rising from the cracked earth, its dark energy pulsing in time with Darren's heart. It wasn't just a physical object, it was a living thing, a wound in the fabric of space, and it felt like it was breathing. This doesn't look ominous at all, Darren said. What's the worst that could happen? Aronel shot him a look that was almost exasperated. Do not jinx it. As they approached the gate, they could see the cultists, Ecliptarch's followers, standing in a ritual circle, chanting in an ancient tongue. Their robes were covered in sigils Darren didn't recognize, and their eyes glowed with an eerie light, the only thing that seemed to have any life on this desolate world. They're trying to force the gate open, Aronel said. We must stop them. Darren raised his hand, drawing the sword from its sheath with the kind of ease that had come naturally in the last few days. The sword hummed in his grip, as if it too was ready for the confrontation. All right, he said, let's shut this thing down. Together. The sword pulsed and the ground beneath them quivered. As if responding to his words, the air around the cultists grew thick with energy, the temperature plummeting as a shadowy figure began to manifest at the gate's center. It was the Ecliptarch, the cosmic parasite that had been tearing through the fabric of reality, seeking entry. "I didn't think I'd be facing off with an eldritch monstrosity before lunch," Darren muttered. He looked over at Skiff. "You didn't happen to bring a flamethrower, did you?" Skiff handed him a small gleaming object. "A plasma blade," he said with a shrug. "Just in case." Darren swung the sword again, this time in a fluid arc, as the cultists' chants turned into frantic, guttural screams. The Ecliptarch lurched forward, its grotesque form writhing in the air, tendrils of shadow coiling toward them. "Time to dance," Darren said with a grin, more for himself than anyone else. The sword flared, sending a burst of pure light into the air, forcing the Ecliptarch to recoil. It was as if the blade knew exactly how to cut through the creature's very essence, severing the link between it and the gate. But the battle wasn't over. The cultists, now enraged, lunged forward with bladed weapons. Aranel fought with fluid grace, every strike a work of precision. Skiff, in his own way, was using his strange alien tools to disable the cultists' communications, their weapons turning useless in his hands. Darren, still holding the sword, stepped forward and swung in a wide arc, his earlier clumsiness replaced by something more instinctual. The blade sliced through the air with a sharp hiss, cutting down an incoming cultist. As the sword vibrated, the ground around him seemed to shift in sync, the weight of destiny pressing down on him. He didn't feel fear anymore, only a strange, calm certainty that he was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. Then, with a final, desperate scream, the Ecliptarch's form collapsed into a cloud of swirling energy, disintegrating into nothing. The gate flickered and began to implode on itself, collapsing in a flash of brilliant white light. Darren lowered the sword, his hands shaking. The storm on Revok 9 seemed to calm, the gravitational anomalies settling, as if the planet itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The gate was no more. "Well," Darren said, wiping the sweat from his brow, "I think that went well." Ornell approached, her expression unreadable once more. But there was something there, a hint of respect. "You did well, Darren Holt. The blade chose wisely." Darren chuckled. "I think it just needed someone who didn't overthink everything." Skiff floated over, bouncing on his feet. Okay, I admit it. The funk playlist might have been too much, but I did save you from the worst of it." Darren grinned, shaking his head. "You're a menace, Skiff. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to look at a disco ball the same way again." They made their way back to the shuttle, the storm clearing as they lifted off. Aranel stood by the window, gazing at the now silent planet below. Darren felt a strange sense of closure settle over him. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't wanted to be a hero. But now, as he looked at the calm in the Queen's eyes and the peace around them, he realized he hadn't been running away from fate after all. Maybe he'd just been afraid of accepting it. "I'm still charging you extra for that contract," Darren muttered, half to himself. Aranel smiled faintly. "Of course, Darren." And as the Varelian dawn left the gravity wells of Revok 9 behind, Darren Holt, mechanic, warrior, reluctant hero, realized that sometimes the universe just needed a little bit of chaos to make things right. At least that's what he told himself as the disco tunes began to play again. The transmission crackled as Zaruna stood in the darkened chamber of the Solvrian warship, her pale hands resting lightly on the smooth, obsidian console. The hum of the engine reverberated through the ship's metallic bones, an almost comforting reminder of her place in this vast, indifferent empire. She had been raised in the rigidity of the Solvrian way, loyal, efficient, and without question. She was a soldier and envoy of her people's will, and in her youth she had believed that was enough, that perhaps this was all there was. But today there was an uncomfortable tremor in her chest, a subtle but persistent ache that gnawed at her, like the edges of a rusted blade. It was a reminder of the mission ahead. "Approaching target coordinates," came the voice through the transmission, its tone cool and devoid of emotion. "Deploying blockade in 15 minutes. Human resistance will be neutralized as scheduled." Zaruna's eyes narrowed, though no one could see the subtle shift of her expression. The message was direct, final. There would be no room for mercy. The humans on the outpost, a small, insignificant outpost at the edge of the galaxy, were irrelevant to the grand machinations of the Solvrian Empire. A blip, a brief interruption in the conquest that had brought her people to the precipice of intergalactic dominance. Yet there was one human on that outpost who had been more than a simple obstacle. Mark. The thought of him caught her off guard, but she shoved it aside. She had a duty to her people. She had sworn an oath, and nothing, not even the small, fleeting memories of a human she had come to know, could alter that path. The transport bay doors hissed open behind her, the sound of distant footfalls breaking through her moment of reverie. She turned to face the newcomer, who was one of her most trusted officers. "Commander Zaruna," the officer said with a salute, his voice just a touch too formal. "We are ready for departure." She nodded and stepped away from the console, making her way to the transport vessel that would take her to the surface of the planet below. The ship's thin walls hummed softly as the crew adjusted the course. Zaruna's fingers twitched at her side, an unconscious movement that belied the weight of the situation. This was not like other missions. This one was different. As the transport glided through the atmosphere, Zaruna glanced out the window. The planet below was a chaotic blend of desert and urban sprawl, the signs of human industry clashing with the unforgiving terrain. A stark contrast to the serene and controlled worlds of the Solvrian Empire, where everything was ordered, precise. Yet there was something about the disarray of this human world that was strangely captivating. "You all right, Commander?" The voice behind her broke her thoughts once again. It was the young officer who had spoken earlier, his tone tentative. "Fine," Zaruna replied curtly, though even she could hear the crack in her own voice. "Just thinking." "Thinking?" The officer chuckled lightly, though it was clear he was trying to mask his nervousness. "You know, I've read all the reports. The humans are resilient. I'm sure the blockade will go as planned. But, I've also heard stories about their ingenuity." He paused as if weighing whether or not to continue. "Some say they're like roaches. No matter how many times you try to squash them, they always find a way to survive." Zaruna raised an eyebrow, her lips quirking in the slightest of smiles. "Is that supposed to make me feel better, Lieutenant? Are you suggesting I'll need to bring a can of bug spray?" The officer blinked, taken aback by her lightheartedness, but she could see the faintest hint of relief in his eyes. She knew the tension was high on all sides. Even the most seasoned officers were uneasy about dealing with the unpredictable humans. Their resistance had proven irritatingly effective in the past, but Zaruna had seen far worse, and she had dealt with it with cold, ruthless efficiency. "Just trying to lighten the mood," the officer said, though his attempt seemed to fall flat. "I hear the humans have this thing called humor. They find it funny when things go wrong." He chuckled again, this time with more conviction. "Sounds like a dangerous habit," Zaruna mused. "I'm sure I could find some use for it. In case the Empire ever runs out of weapons, we could just bomb them with bad jokes." Her response caught him off guard, and for a brief moment, the young officer allowed himself a laugh. A quick, nervous burst that cut through the tension like a laser through fog. Zaruna couldn't help but feel a small spark of satisfaction at his reaction. She wasn't a fool. She knew how to manage her crew. Humor had its place, even in the darkest of times. After all, it had been one of the first things Mark had introduced her to when they had met. The transport jerked as it touched down on the surface, its landing gear scraping against the planet's uneven ground. The ship's engines powered down, and a sharp silence fell over the crew. Zaruna rose from her seat, her posture stiff, her mind clearing of all distractions. She could no longer afford the luxury of doubt. The mission was clear. The humans were the enemy. She led the team into the bustling human outpost, her every step deliberate. The planet's dust clung to her boots, a reminder of the untamed world she had arrived on. The walls of the outpost were made of scrap metal and makeshift materials, nothing like the pristine, imposing structures of the Solvrian Empire. This was an environment born of necessity, not elegance. The humans here had no illusions about their survival. Their once proud military had been reduced to a ragtag group of civilians and soldiers, doing what they could to hold on to their fragile lives. They weren't warriors in the grand sense, but Zaruna had come to respect their resilience. It was this very resilience that made the betrayal she had delivered even more difficult to bear. Mark had been one of the first to reach out to her, his quiet intelligence drawing her in. Their conversations had started innocuously enough, about nothing in particular, yet somehow they had found common ground in the oddest of places. His kindness, his willingness to listen, to understand the things that no one else seemed to care about, had touched something deep within her. Something she hadn't realized was there, until it was too late. She couldn't afford to think about that now. She couldn't afford to think about Mark at all. The transmission crackled again in her earpiece, her mind snapping back to the present. Blockade initiated, proceeding with the operation. Understood, she replied, her voice cold as she activated the communication system to deliver the final coordinates. She stood there, her mind warring with itself, but her body moved automatically. She had been trained for moments like this. As the first shots rang out in the distance, Zaruna's thoughts were far from the battlefield. She wasn't just betraying an outpost. She was betraying a man, a memory, and that, she realized with a sickening clarity, was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. Years had passed and Zaruna had risen within the ranks of the Solvrian Empire, her name spoken with reverence and fear in equal measure. She had become a symbol of her people's power, a living testament to the cold, efficient will of the Empire. Yet in the quiet moments between battles, when her mind wandered far from the mission, it was Mark's face that haunted her, his laughter, his voice, the way he'd looked at her, as though he could see her, really see her, beyond the armor and the hardened shell she had so carefully built around herself. She had tried to bury those memories under layers of duty and responsibility, but they had a way of resurfacing, like a nagging itch that couldn't be scratched. In the heart of the Solvrian fleet, Zaruna stood on the command bridge of her flagship, staring out into the endless void of space. The stars flickered before her, cold and distant, like forgotten dreams. Her mind, however, was not on the mission at hand. Instead, it was on the image of the human she had once betrayed. Mark. She had done it for the Empire. She had done it because it was what was expected of her. But deep down, she knew that she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The weight of that decision pressed heavily on her chest, even now when the war was so far from over. Commander Zaruna, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Officer Kanar, her most trusted subordinate, standing at attention before her, a datapad in hand. The human fleet is in range. They're about to engage. Zaruna blinked, her gaze snapping back to the present. The human forces had been growing in strength, their resistance becoming more coordinated, more effective. It was no longer the ragtag collection of civilians and soldiers she had seen so long ago. These humans were a threat, and that threat needed to be neutralized once and for all. But even as she gave the orders to prepare for battle, a small, stubborn part of her wondered if Mark was still out there, somewhere, fighting against her. Are the ships ready? She asked, her voice steady, though there was an edge to it now, an unmistakable sharpness. Yes, Commander, Kinar replied. We will launch the first strike in 15 minutes. Zaruna nodded, turning her attention to the display in front of her. The human fleet loomed large on the screens, a motley array of ships that looked as though they had been assembled with whatever scrap metal they could find. Still, there was an undeniable resilience to them. Zaruna couldn't help but admire it, even if she couldn't allow herself to show it. As the countdown began, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. The thought of Mark, the thought of him leading the human forces, gnawed at her. She could almost hear his voice again, like an echo from another life. You know, Zaruna, there's a better way to do this. We don't have to be enemies. She had laughed at him then, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. Who was this man, this human, to talk about peace when the galaxy was engulfed in war? He had no idea what it meant to stand on the precipice of total victory, to feel the power of the Solvrian Empire at your back. But now, years later, she found herself questioning the very ideals she had once held so firmly. Was it possible to find peace in a universe built on bloodshed and conquest? Commander, the human ships are locking onto us. Kinar's voice brought her back to reality. We're ready to strike. Zaruna took a deep breath. There was no time for second guessing. The mission was clear. The fleet would destroy the human forces, and the war would continue, as it always had. Yet as the first wave of attacks launched, something unexpected happened. The human fleet, though vastly outnumbered, fought with a tenacity that was almost familiar. As the explosions ripped through the vastness of space, Zaruna couldn't help but smile, albeit faintly. "They've gotten better," she muttered under her breath. Kanar shot her a curious glance. "Pardon, Commander." "Nothing," she replied quickly, shaking her head. "Just keep your focus. We're not done yet." But the human fleet wasn't going down without a fight. The battle dragged on, longer than Zaruna had anticipated. The human ships, though smaller and less advanced, were cunning. They dodged, they wove through the chaos of the battlefield, and they had a surprising amount of firepower hidden beneath their worn-out hulls. It was almost as if they had learned from their past mistakes. As the battle raged, Zaruna's thoughts flickered back to that fateful day, years ago, when she had made the choice that had shattered everything. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she whispered to herself, though she knew no one would hear. It wasn't long before a familiar signal appeared on her communications panel. It was a human ship broadcasting on a secure frequency. Zaruna's heart skipped a beat. She recognized that signature, a signature she had hoped to never see again. "Zaruna," came a voice over the comms. It was calm, almost too calm, and undeniably familiar. "I never thought I'd hear from you again. Not after everything that happened." Her stomach dropped. She straightened, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the holographic display. Mark's face appeared on the screen, his features lined with age and the strain of battle, but his eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with such understanding, remained unchanged. "You're still alive," Zaruna said, her voice betraying a mix of disbelief and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Mark's smile was soft, tinged with something that might have been sadness, or maybe it was just weariness. "Last time I checked," he replied. "You've been busy, I see." The tension in Zaruna's chest flared again, but she pushed it down. She had no time for this. The war was still happening, and she couldn't afford to lose herself in the past. "I won't make this a long conversation," she said, her tone now cold and professional. "We will finish this. There's no room for mercy now." Mark's smile faded, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though he was searching for the right words. "Zaruna, you don't have to do this. It doesn't have to end like this." Her hand twitched, her fingers almost reaching for the controls that would end the transmission. But then she stopped herself, the vulnerability in his voice. It was almost unbearable. "Why, Mark?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying the conflict she had long suppressed. "Why are you still trying to reach out to me, after everything I've done?" Mark's eyes softened, the lines of battle fading into the background as he spoke. "Because I know you, Zaruna. And I know that the person you were, the person I knew, would never let this war define who you are. There's still a chance for you to change. For both of us." The words hung in the air between them like a delicate thread, fragile and fraying. Zaruna didn't know what to say. She couldn't. There was nothing to say that would undo the past. But somehow, the weight of his forgiveness, of his unshakable belief in her, made everything feel possible. "You're wasting your time," Zaruna said, her voice cracking slightly. "You'll be dead before you can change anything." "We both might be," Mark replied, his voice steady despite the odds. "But if there's even a sliver of hope, then I'll hold on to it, for both of us." Zaruna closed her eyes, the battle continuing around her. She had once been a soldier of the Empire. She had once been certain. But now, with Mark's voice in her ear, everything was different. She didn't know what to do. She only knew one thing. The universe was changing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to change with it. The battle had raged for hours, the stars themselves seeming to recoil as blasts of energy tore through the fabric of space. Zaruna stood on the command deck of her ship, her fingers curled tightly around the rail in front of her. The human fleet was still holding strong, defying every expectation. She could feel the tension in the air, the hum of the ship's systems in sync with the pulse of her own heartbeat. It had been so easy to fall into the rhythm of war, to believe that the victory of the Solvrian Empire was a foregone conclusion. So simple to disregard everything that came before. The ideals, the humanity. But now, as the war dragged on and Mark's voice echoed in her mind, Zaruna found herself questioning everything. She had never been one to entertain such weakness, but today, as the universe seemed to close in around her, she felt something stirring inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The comm system buzzed, and Zaruna's attention snapped to the screen. Mark's face, worn with the scars of battle, appeared once more. Despite the harsh lines of war etched into his features, there was a softness in his eyes that sent a jolt through her chest. For a moment, it was as though no time had passed. It was just the two of them, standing on a battlefield, with the fate of the galaxy in the balance. "Zaruna," Mark said, his voice steady, though tinged with the same sorrow it had carried years ago. "I've been thinking a lot about this, about everything, and I've come to a conclusion." Zaruna didn't respond immediately. She was silent, watching him, feeling the weight of everything she had done, everything she had become. It wasn't just the war, it was the betrayal, the coldness she had wrapped herself in, the empire she had sworn to serve, and the man she had left behind. "You're still fighting for the wrong side, Mark," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this. Not really." Mark smiled, that same quiet, understanding smile that had once made her heart race. "I know, but it's not too late to change, Zaruna. You know that, don't you?" Her throat tightened and she turned away from the screen. She couldn't look at him anymore. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I don't know how to stop this," she muttered, her voice raw with uncertainty. "I don't know how to fix it." "You don't have to fix everything," Mark's voice responded. "You just have to do what you know is right." She felt the words sink into her, like a slow burn that spread through her chest. Mark wasn't asking for her to make grand gestures, or for her to save the galaxy in one swoop. He was simply asking her to remember who she was, to find her way back to herself. The transmission cut out abruptly, and Zaruna was left alone with her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the holographic map of the battlefield, and she could almost hear the distant hum of the human fleet, still holding on. She knew what she had to do. "I have to stop this," she whispered to herself. "I have to end it. For good." She turned toward her crew, all of them standing at attention, awaiting her orders. They had no idea what was going through her mind. To them, she was still the commander, the cold, ruthless leader who had led them to victory after victory. They had no idea that everything was about to change. "Prepare to disengage the fleet," Zaruna said, her voice firm, but without the usual edge of authority. "I'm calling for a ceasefire." The crew exchanged confused glances, but no one spoke out. They had learned long ago that their commander's decisions, however strange, were always final. "Commander, are you certain?" Kinar asked, stepping forward with a furrowed brow. "The human fleet is still a threat. I'm certain," Zaruna interrupted, her eyes locking with his. "It ends now. I won't be the one to carry this war any longer." She turned back to the communication system, sending out a signal to the human fleet, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt surreal, this moment of vulnerability, of exposure. But it was also a moment of power. She was choosing her own path, no longer shackled by the expectations of the Empire. Within moments, the response came, crackling through the comm system. Mark's voice, full of hope, filled the room. "We've received your signal, Zaruna. It's over then?" "Yes," Zaruna replied, her voice steady. "It's over." The war didn't end with a single victory or a grand gesture. There were no explosions or dramatic showdowns. Instead, it ended with quiet resolve, a decision made not in the heat of battle, but in the heart. The ceasefire was called. The two fleets, once poised to destroy each other, now stood at a tenuous peace, the air heavy with the weight of everything they had lost and everything they could still save. In the days that followed, Zaruna found herself on a small, nameless world, far from the empire she had served and the people she had betrayed. It was a simple place, untouched by war, and it gave her a moment to breathe, to reflect. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of it. She met with Mark again, in the same quiet way they always had. This time, there was no battlefield between them, no armor, just two people. trying to make sense of the pieces they had left. "You were right," she said softly, looking at him across the table. "It wasn't too late to change." Mark smiled, his eyes kind and forgiving. "I never doubted you, Zaruna." Zaruna couldn't help but chuckle. "You should have. I'm terrible at this." He laughed too, the sound easy and warm, like a bond that had never truly broken. For a moment, they were just two people, sitting together in the quiet after the storm, the weight of the universe forgotten. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zaruna allowed herself to believe that there might be a future, one not shaped by war or duty, but by something else, something simpler, something worth fighting for. The stars outside the window still twinkled with a cold, indifferent light, but inside, where the past and future converged, there was warmth, there was hope, and there was, perhaps for the first time, peace.